Hey,
Everybody, we are here with Karl Archuleta, and I probably just butchered your name. I don't know. I tried to put a Spanish accent on it, but I have a feeling it's not Spanish.
No,
But
you're correct.
Karl. Thank you so much.
Correcto, es Archuleta. Está bien.
Okay. Gracias. Y su español impresionante.
Okay, gracias.
Yeah. So here we got a couple of gringos trying to impress each other with our Spanish.
That's right.
But here with Karl, and we're just having a good time talking about a very important topic that's near and dear to my heart, especially. I know Karl's too. We are both, I would say, we're both on the north side of, or on the over the hill side of our lives, I guess. And but we've been in our past, at least, really powerful technologists, able to do so many things. And now we find ourselves leaders, and we're kind of in this conundrum of, well, should we actually do something about that technical issue? Like, personally, should I jump in and start coding around everybody else instead of maintaining a position of leadership and trying to be an encourager and helping? So there's a balance there that we want to talk about today. So we're going to be talking about wisely wielding my tech skills, as a tech leader, my tech skills, as other people are trying to wield their own tech skills. So Karl, tell us about yourself and where you're at today and what you've been up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name is Karl Archuleta, and I am half Spanish, so not full gringo.
All right.
My grandparents are bilingual, and that's where I learned words like manzana before I learned apple. So I do have a little bit of that.
So you come by it
heritage.
honest.
I come by it honestly. Yeah. So my background, I went to school for engineering physics. Definitely a technical guy. Fell in love with software coding, software engineering. Before I reached my teen years, I started programming, and it always came natural to me. I was fortunate with that. But I also probably in high school and in college got exposed to leadership. I was fortunate to be part of a program at CU Boulder called President's Leadership Class, which I'm still involved with years later, which really is meant to help evolve and grow potential leadership skills in individuals. So got exposed early to that. And throughout my career, first kind of third in aerospace, middle section in medical devices, and then this last kind of 6 or 7 years I've been in healthcare. Got to work in a startup, be kind of the main guy, employee number 2. So I've been in large and small technical leadership roles. Most recently, senior vice president of Nimble Science, and then I'm working as a CTO for a company called Nuclear Care Partners right now.
Okay, and I hear you've also been a hobbyist in a thrill-seeking space. So what have you been doing lately that's been dangerous, like tempting fate?
I was thinking a little bit about that. It really kind of depends on who you hang out with. So, compared to the people I hang out with, I'm like pretty mild. But yeah, I love to jump on my mountain bike and ride up mountains and earn my downhill and zip back down the mountains. Grew up skiing. I ski slightly better than I walk, and I have been known to jump out of an airplane with a parachute. So
preferably.
Yeah, exactly. If you look at it objectively, I can see how someone might call me a thrill seeker, but I think, compared to some of the crazies I've hung out with throughout my life, I'm still pretty chill.
Man, compared to me, you are definitely a thrill seeker. I used to think of myself as a little bit more of a risk taker, but I don't know. Whenever I got married, I just lost I sold my motorcycle, and that was as close as I could come to thrill seeking. And just kind of, I don't know, I lost all the drive for being wild and crazy, and it was like time to settle down.
Yeah.
Sad.
Paradigm shifts, right? It's a natural thing. For me, it was more when we decided to have kids. So my wife was, kind of followed with me, or maybe inspired me. Our first date, we went rock climbing outside of Boulder, and rappelled 3 pitches off of the back of a cliff, and then a few years later we have a kid, and we're like, okay, we got to chill out here a little bit. Now that kid's rock climbing and mountain biking, doing all the stuff. So there you
awesome.
go.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's good that you never lost a love for it too.
That's right.
So today's episode is about like controlling your urge as a tech leader, as a technological, as a skilled technologist and leader, controlling your urge to jump in and just fix all the problems yourself, which I think I've found personally is a really strong urge. So stay tuned. That's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this episode. But I want to get a couple more things out of Karl before we really jump into that theme. So Karl, there's a book out there I know you've been thinking about that has made an impact on you lately. So what have you been reading that has made an impact on how you lead or whatever, something that is helping you to be a better leader?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an avid reader. I read a lot of fiction and read nonfiction and all that kind of stuff. And so go back and forth. I've read a few different things recently. There's a book about kind of organizing, building your second brain by Tiago Forte, which I think I really enjoyed. But I actually revisited this book. Look, it matches my shirt. Even that was not on purpose. Winning with Accountability, and it's a small book. It's you can read it in an hour or two, and it's really an interesting kind of read. I would definitely recommend it for leaders. It's not particularly engineering focused. I think it's a nice thing because it really applies to any leadership and actually any one person. You don't have to be a leader to take some of the lessons from this book. The winning from accountability, that accountability word is so charged. People are like, I'm going to hold you accountable. And it has this negativity. And this book really kind of turns that around and for me, it's a little bit of you can count on me. That's what accountability should mean, is like, you can count on me, not like I'm not blaming you. I'm not going to get you. It's more of this, how do we build a relationship where we can count on each other? And it's got some nice tricks of the trade in that. So I would highly recommend it. It's an easy read. I feel like a lot of the things that we learn when we're doing Agile, whether it's Scrum or similar techniques, some of these things are baked in when you do it correctly. You've got your Scrum board, you got your Kanban board, and you're actually the team is holding itself accountable naturally if it's when we're doing it right.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. So often accountability is treated as like a bad thing, a negative. It's always a negative feedback. If I'm holding you accountable, then you're shaking in your boots, you're worried. Right. And really, at the end of the day, accountability is what makes us all better. And so, wow, how cool would it be if we could get to a point as professionals that we're not afraid of accountability, but that we pursue it, that we expect it from other people, and that we can all be honest about our performance, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to get fired because I've been held accountable. It's more like I get to stay at my job longer because somebody was loving enough to take the time to hold me accountable and take a risk,
Right. And also it's so much comes down to the communication. Like, I really expected this thing from you and you didn't get it done. And I didn't know you wanted me to prioritize this. And so now you don't think you're holding me accountable for something I didn't get done. Whereas if we can get up in front of that, we can have the right language. We can say, hey, what is your expectation? I was thinking I can get this to you by Friday at 10 a.m. Does that work? And you're like, yes, but I think the way I'm thinking about it should only take you a half hour. I'm like, oh, I was thinking it was going to take me 3 days. Maybe maybe we've got a different thing in mind. And getting all of that stuff managed, suddenly everything's going to work better.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially that the last thing that you just mentioned is something that's very close to my day-to-day right now. I'm thinking a lot about estimates and about expectations and trying to align all of those things. Like, maybe estimates are not really a tool that we use to judge how long a project is. Maybe it's better to judge how closely aligned we are to what we're trying to build versus what the developers or whoever's going to build it thinks they're building. Because if I say I would like a login screen and they come back to me and say it's going to take 5 days, I'm going to be like, whoa. What are you thinking you're going to build here that takes 5 days? And I've had people in my past that if that conversation came up, they would be like, for them, it was like, why am I stupid that I said 5 days? And I might even be guilty of thinking the same thing about my own worker, I'm like, why are they so silly to think that this thing should take 5 days? It's not that hard. Mm-hmm. And it's not that we're thinking about the same thing and they are incompetent. It's that we're thinking about two different things, and they are fine. They're competent. I just need to figure out how to find the common ground. so that we know what we're building.
Right. You're picturing, hey, I just need the thing, sketched up in Figma in the 4 buttons. And they're thinking, well, we need to create the workflow. We need to build out the database. We need to make sure that we've got the authentication set up for SSO. And
yeah. Or like one of my favorites is they were going to build it from scratch. I was assuming they were going to use this out of the box component.
Right. Perfect example.
Yeah. And maybe they didn't know about the out of the box component. Maybe they were concerned about licensing and they think that I want them to build it because they think that I don't want to deal with the licensing, because we take estimates out of that space and we put them into some other like planning space that's only useful for the check writers. Then we kind of lose the goodness of estimates. I almost feel like we need to have an entire episode just on estimates.
Count me in. You're resonating with me. I think that what is planning poker really meant to be? Is it really to try to satisfy the product management team outside, or is it actually a tool to align the devs, the QA, product owner with? Are we building the licensing, the building this from scratch, or are we let's just pull this from the library? Let's go. Well, there we go. That's a nice segue into wielding the tech skills. I like that.
Exactly. But before we do that, I don't want to let you off the hook too easily. So we want to make sure that everybody knows. I mean, you've had a long history of successful projects and jobs. You've been a leader. You've been an individual contributor, and so people might make the mistake of thinking that Karl is some superhuman tech leader who never makes mistakes. But we all know that that's not really the case. And so I just want to hear from the horse's mouth, from your mouth. Sure. I just called you a horse. I'm so sorry, Karl. I shouldn't be doing that.
No harm, no foul.
Talking about embarrassing mistakes, that could go so wrong. Anyway, yes. So an embarrassing mistake from you, Karl, that you've made as a tech leader. What is it? Lay it on me. This is confession time.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I have a large bag of mistakes I could have drawn from, for sure. I feel like I've had a very successful career, but it's certainly not because of perfection. It's because I've learned from mistakes. And so I was thinking a little bit about this. You give me a kind of heads up about this. So I wanted to think about something that was thematic. And I'll roll the clock way back to when I was a kind of an early manager. And it was my first time doing merit reviews. And obviously, this is a really important thing for many people. It's either, hey, this is how, a formal feedback, or maybe this connects right into what you're getting paid and what your salary increase is going to be. So, I wanted to do it right. And, I'm coming from an engineering physics background. I've got math and stats and probabilities. And so I'm like, okay, let me do this very quantified, and let me create the parameters and, do this in a multidimensional matrix. And I spent hours and hours building this thing to try to get it as objective as possible. And I looked at it and I'm like, what am I doing? And it's this embarrassing moment of, I am trying to apply, treat this like an algorithm and solving a very specific problem, and losing the humanity. And the actual aspect of that, the embarrassing moment for me was, oh my gosh, this is silly. I just spent 2 or 3 or 4 hours on this, and I have nothing really to show for it, because I was aiming for the wrong thing. I was trying to rank my team in some sort of arbitrary dimensional way, because that's what I thought my management needed. And in reality, yes, you have part of that, but actually the real thing is how, through this process, this merit review process, can I communicate with each individual at that level? What did they need? What did they do very well? How can I, emphasize that? And yes, there is some aspect of ranking and taking into consideration a bunch of different things, but it's really human first rather than algorithm first. And so that's my embarrassing story.
I'm trying to think back to some of my times giving these kinds of reviews, and I feel like I've made some of the same mistakes. So I really identify with that. I don't know. I think that's such a good example of a great mistake. But next time you come on the podcast, I think we need to hear something a little bit more like self-effacing, more embarrassing.
All right.
Like,
That won't be too hard for me to dig through. I'll definitely
okay.
think something a little bit might bring some color to my face. All right. I'll challenge accepted.
I liked your story so much. I identify it with that, and probably I'll bet every leader has dealt with something like that. Like eventually, if you stop just checking the boxes, and if you stop just going by the book from rote memory, and you just start trying to lead people, you're going to find yourself in the same space.
Remember, we're people, humans trying to serve other humans, and I think if we start there, and I think that's a little bit more challenging when you come from a technical background and you're used to being valued by solving technical problems, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to solve this technical leadership problem. Like, yes, but
that's probably a pretty good segue into what we're talking about today. I mean, both of us, we transitioned into leadership from our positions as individual contributors. We used to be in the trenches. We were at the front lines. Eventually they moved us to the captain's spot or the lieutenant's spot, or they eventually got us all the way out of the trenches, and now we're calling the shots from the ivory tower.
Right.
And you and I were talking about this before, and it just resonated so much. Like, I remember the time when the CEO at our company, I was the CTO, and I was definitely, like, admittedly, I was coding way too much. And he came to me and he said, Byron, I'm sorry, but I have to prohibit you from coding on projects anymore.
Yeah.
And I promise you, at least I don't think so. Maybe he can come on the show and correct me where I'm wrong, but I don't think it's because I was bad. I think it was because, as he knew wisely, as a leader of teams, and at this point we had, I don't know, north of 30 developers and QA and everything, I couldn't possibly lead at the level that I needed to lead and be in the code at the same time. And not to mention, if I was ever coding on something that was mission critical, then I was most definitely holding back the team, because I'd be coding for a while and then I'd go off to a leadership meeting or meet with a client or whatever. I'd be blocking the development team. So, yeah, that was a hard conversation. Did you ever have a moment in your history where you kind of either prohibited yourself or somebody else tapped you on the shoulder and asked you to step back?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that definitely resonates. I didn't have it as explicit from a leader, black and white like that. I've definitely had the times where, a reminder that make sure you're not blocking, et cetera. But I would say for me, it's been a little bit more of going through that process, especially the first time was probably harder. But after that, kind of recognizing what can I be doing? What is the best way that I, as the team lead or as the manager or as a director or whatever title I had at the time, can I be, optimizing my team's output? And it's whether I can look back at several of my career points where eventually I would get to a point where I was coding less and less and less, to a point where I'm like, okay, in order to make the team as effective as possible, I'm in meetings all day, just like you said. I can't be a blocker. I need to be delegating. That's a big part of my responsibilities, etc. But then for me, it comes to the end of the week, I'm fried. I've been doing leadership. I've been in meetings all day. I feel good about those things, but at the same time, there's part of my own self that's like, there's something that I'm not satisfying for myself, and maybe something that I'm not giving back to the team that I could be giving to the team. And so I've noticed throughout my career, I've kind of followed that path of getting, further and further out of the trenches, and then taking a step back and saying, maybe it's time for a change. How do I need to evolve my own career, step back into the trenches at a different company or what have you? And that's actually followed me a few times. Like when I left aerospace, I was managing, had, a pinky toe in the development. I was probably 29 years old at the time. And I said, I like leadership, but I'm not quite ready to give up the reins. And so I explicitly said, I am seeking a individual contributor job. And I did that and I loved it. And then in that next company, I, changed, followed that same pattern, and it was a healthy thing for me. But definitely, I've kind of done this kind of sinusoidal large balance over time.
So for you, it wasn't like a big, like a one-time movement away from contribution. It was more like a kind of an in and out, in and out, and then eventually you. I don't know. I should ask you this: Are you still coding? Are you still contributing to an extent right now?
My current CTO job, very little. But if I roll back the clock a year, I would say that as a senior vice president, it was a small team. I had built from it was a 2-person team when I started. We got up to kind of a 10-person development and QA team. And near the end, I was still very cognizant of all of the technical, particularly the back end, which was more of my strengths. But I'd really moved away from coding. I was doing code reviews, which I could not block. I could just still kind of look at the code, but there was other code reviewers. So if I was busy, it wasn't holding the team back. So I still maintained a little bit of a code, but would be able to have the technical whiteboarding conversations, but was really not really, submitting anything into GitHub on a regular basis.
So let's say rewind like 10 years. Think about like when you started, and I'm just like taking a stab into the darkness as far as like the timing goes, but think back to when you were starting to move more towards into the leadership stage. If someone were to tell you that in order to be the best leader, you can't code, kind of like what they told me, would you have continued down that path of leadership?
It really kind of depends on who told me, who would have said that to me. And I think it really kind of comes back to the mentoring. So if I had someone from sales who had never coded in their life telling me that, I'd be like, thanks, but yeah, I'm not so sure. If I had a software technician, engineer who had gone through that path before and said, for my journey, it would have held me back in what I was trying to achieve. So Karl, you really need to think about how this is going to balance for you. Yes. And I was fortunate enough that did happen for me. I had he wasn't a software guy. He was a mechanical engineer who became the VP of engineering for a medical device company. And we had a similar conversation, and he had stayed technical for a long time. And at some point it's like, yeah, I was meeting with the FDA and I answered 19 out of 20 other questions. And then the 20th question I couldn't answer. And then the FDA auditor was like, can you send in a real engineer? And and so I'm like, yeah, I feel you. So yeah, it really matters who says that. And I also think you have to kind of reflect what is success for you. If you really want to get to that next level and really drive the strategy of a company and be in charge of a large development, maybe you can't be in the trenches at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you're planning on being with a small team for the longest, if you want to be with startups and you want to work on small teams constantly, then maybe you can be the leader and be in the trenches at the same time, because it's maybe essential. Maybe it's the only way to actually survive as a company.
Exactly.
But looking back, once I started down this road, I think if somebody had told me, Byron, you're not going to be able to code as a leader, I might have actually said, nope, don't want that. You can keep it.
Yep.
Because I love it. I love coding. I love creating. I love deploying to production. I love automating.
It's so satisfying, right? You can solve a problem and it's done and it works and your unit tests pass and you can see someone use it and it satisfies a need. You're like, that's so rewarding. And it's very black and white once you get that, like, it works. Yes. And people are squishy. Like they cry if you squeeze them too much, and they're just harder to. Code doesn't cry usually. Yeah. Code doesn't complain quite so much. I mean, your unit tests might complain, but at least there's only two colors, red or green. Yes, exactly. But yeah, people are different, and I have over time, I have learned
a love for developing people and leading
Same.
people. And
Yes.
at the end of the day, it's kind of like code. It's not quite as black and white as a passing or failing unit test. It's not quite as predictable as code, as I don't even know if code is really that predictable anymore, but
Right.
but there are things to love about developing and leading people. So it's such a toss up. If like I said, if you had asked me 20 years ago if I would continue down this path of leadership without coding, I would say no. But
Right.
but if you ask me now, I might say, well, yeah, I'm glad that it happened the way it did.
Yes, I think that's fair, and it's maybe one of those things that you don't know what you really want, and if you were basing it off of your own experience at the time, you might be thinking too narrowly. So yeah, I appreciate that. I think the same thing. Like I think there's a lot of developers out there that have some real leadership potential, and maybe you're just like we were 20 years ago, and we're like, there's no way I want to give up the code. And actually, that's something I want to talk a little bit about. I think that'd be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so before we get into that kind of stuff, give me some strategies that you have used over the past few years to be able to maintain a seat at the table as a contributor in a way. Like, I don't know, as a coder on a project, maybe not, but like, how have you been able to maintain your technical contribution to a project even from the leadership seat?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think first and foremost, one of the things that I think I got lucky in kind of doing is taking a step back and asking myself, what do I really want? How do I best contribute to myself, to my team, to my company? And, there's not one right answer. And it really kind of depends on your skills, how you define success, et cetera. And for me, I did kind of come to a conclusion that I always want to have some connection with the technical. It actually, in my opinion, and in my skill set, makes me a better technical leader, because if I'm so far away from it, then how am I going to relate to the problems they're having? I don't need to necessarily jump in the code and solve it, but I need to be able to relate on an emotional level and understand when they're talking about, a developer's talking about a automation or a Kubernetes deployment or what have you. And if I don't have any connection to that, how can I relate? How can I know if it's a big problem or a small problem? So
Yeah.
for me, that was the first step, is like, what is important to me, and recognizing maybe that means I'm not going to be targeting myself for the CTO of a Fortune 500 company and really relying on my next two line levels of management to do everything. And maybe that's something that I'm not pursuing because I want that. Maybe, I'm not chasing the almighty dollar quite as hard as some of my colleagues. And so like you mentioned, that, do I target smaller companies, or do I think about how do I grow a company into a level that I want it to be, and then look for a next opportunity? So I think that's the first thing, is how do you target your own skill set, your own objectives, and then try to match them with a company that really can benefit from your approach. Mm-hmm. The second maybe would be thinking about the humanity aspect of it. One of the things that really drew me to your podcast is, how do we help our teams flourish? And as a technical leader, I want to be inspiring to technical people, but I also don't want to be the opposite of that and be like that situation where someone's like, I never want your job. And so I think that that's something to really reflect. Like if I'm doing a good job, we're moving the company forward first and foremost. And then secondarily, we're really thinking about what's the long-term health of our team? How are we all growing together? How am I learning and teaching? So that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah. So what does this have to do with human flourishing then? We're talking about like wisely wielding our tech skills as leaders. Yeah. So what does that have to do with human flourishing? Why does that even matter?
Well, I think that when we're talking about technical leaders, then we're talking about leading people that have these technical skills. And in order to relate to them, we need to be able to stay at some in some contact with the technical, because otherwise you might not have respect, or you might be providing advice that doesn't really relate to someone's career goal. And then for me, I think it's when you think about helping develop people as contributors within the company and to achieve their own career goals, well, there's the management path. There's also the technical path. There's also some sort of hybrid maybe. And as a leader, if you're leaning fully into leadership and move yourself completely away from technical, then how are you going to help the developers flourish that are really focused on becoming that technical guru but aren't there yet?
Yeah. Well, and especially if we are constantly jumping in and like Nick Burns, the company computer guy, move and like push everybody out of the way and like, there, I fixed it. Learn something. People, like if we do that kind of thing, if we are always jumping in and flexing our muscles, then it robs our people of their autonomy. It discourages them. It robs them of opportunities to get actual accountability and feedback on their abilities. Maybe they didn't know how to do the thing. Maybe they needed an extra 5 minutes to solve the problem on their own.
Exactly. And I think that's probably, I don't know, what do you think? It maybe the most common mistake of kind of a newly minted team lead or leader who's trying to make that transition into leading people, but still is kind of I know this system better than anybody else. And, we've got this deadline. So the best thing to do is push my second in command out of the way and I'll just get this done. I can do this faster. Yeah. I feel like we've all made that mistake. And I think some people never outgrow that mistake. But yeah, that is a mistake, right? It's not.
Yes.
It's not the best thing for the team. It's not the best thing for the company in the long run. And ultimately, You're trying to provide your own self-worth by holding on instead of sharing.
That's probably kind of like a core of the issue. Maybe we secretly are all a little bit insecure about our self-worth and our own contribution. Right. Like when somebody else knows this, code something, you build something and you deploy it and people start using it, you get instant gratification, that dopamine hit when you see the number of people using the thing. Every time you see the ticker go up, you get a little shot of dopamine. But when you're leading people, you don't get any of that. I don't know, that's we should fix that. Like we should have a dopamine injection system for people work too.
Yeah, I feel left out. Yes, exactly. And that's actually something I also, again, a mentor of mine who had moved, who he came from an embedded systems perspective, and we were developing more of a Windows-based system. So he was a little far afield from it, what is beyond his expertise. Great leader, good technical leader, human person. And I remember a really strong moment for me as a new leader, where we were in some meeting and I kind of was beating my own chest a little bit about how my team and myself, we came up with this great technical solution and blah, 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 blah. And after the fact, he kind of pulled me aside. He's like, Karl, you didn't give me any credit. And yes, I don't know all the details like you do, but there's an aspect of that leadership that you're not representing. Mm-hmm. And it was a real aha moment for me. He opened himself up to that. And I'm like, it's exactly the feeling you just were saying of like, he's not getting that dopamine hit anymore. And here I am just completely stealing it from him. Like, no dopamine for you. And that's not great. You don't do that to your boss.
I just got a memory and a mental image of the soup Nazi.
No dopamine for you.
Yeah. And so we can't be that way. And honestly, as leaders, our value and contribution as leaders is really measured in our team. It's not measured in us necessarily. Like if our team is flourishing and if our team is hitting all the markers and they're productive and they're efficient, then that's when we can pat ourselves on the back. That's when we actually look good as leaders to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, I agree. The way that it kind of clicked for me, what you were just saying, Byron, I remember a few years ago, I priding myself in how I'm a really good developer, and hey, I know this system really well, and I'm like the guy that can probably do this twice as fast as anybody else. So let's just say that I'm right, even though it's probably egotistical and not. I'm twice as good. I'm twice as good. Well, I've got 6 developers on my team. So even at my best, I'm a third as good as the team, right?
Yeah.
At my best. So at some point, the math will never, if you're running a team well, it's always going to be better than just a one person. And so being that, holding on to that pride of I'm the best is not serving yourself as a leader, right? It doesn't matter at some point. The best thing you can do is empower those other people to up their game, because now you're increasing your productivity 6-fold instead of 1.1-fold.
And really, if we think about it, like the problems that we solve as coders, as individual contributors, they're fun. They're great problems to solve. They do give that instant gratification, that dopamine hit, all those good things, but they are very, very solvable problems. They've been solved probably many times before us, right, as is proven by any AI that can write code, because it's writing code that has already been written. So
exactly,
how many times do people have to build a login screen? Well, maybe in your career, you might have to build 100 of them. I don't know, unless you stay on one project for a really, really long time. Right. Solving that problem is fun, but it's not that big of a deal. Now, on the other hand, if you can crack the nut of helping a team to flourish,
yes,
that seems like a much more worthy problem. And not only is the math on your side, like if you can get your team to flourish, then they are multiples of you, not just what you can do, but multiples of you.
And maybe
that's
things that you never could have,
and
maybe things you never could have done, right? Because they bring their own diversity, their own skill. Let me ask you a question. So I think, like me, you and I and many of your listeners consider ourselves problem solvers, and we love to solve problems. And when you think about you were kind of hinting at this, like you got your technical problems. Well, now as a leader, you're continually evolving. And how do I solve the problems with my team, with my individual, with my direct reports, maybe even with my managers? How would you rate the technical problems versus the human problems in terms of what's harder to solve? What keeps you up?
Easy.
Right?
So easy. Yeah. Like a few years ago, I decided to just kind of step out of the box in LinkedIn, for example. And instead of having a title that's really marketable and that's easy for people that want to hire me to find, I just called myself a people developer. And people sometimes they don't really understand it. They don't get it. Sometimes people see it and they're like, yes, that's great. And so I am a developer. I will always be a developer until the day I die. I'll be a creator. And my wife, she rolls her eyes every time I say I've got a new idea or I want to create something. She just rolls her eyes. But that's me at my core. And whether I'm developing software or I'm developing people, I'm developing something. And so I think of the people that I work with, not in a weird way, but like as almost like coding projects or software development projects where, especially if they give me permission, I will code on them with all of my passion and try to help them to become a new creation or better. And I don't know if that resonates with anybody, but I think of myself as a people developer, and I think that those problems are now I know this, way more fun than any coding project that I ever built on.
Way more fun, way more squishy. Longer term, in a lot of cases, a lot of times there's not that quick fix. You don't get the dopamine hit, but man, it's an amazing feeling when 2 years, 3 years later, you get a call from a person that you worked with, and they're like, "Hey, Byron, that one thing you did for me, you coded for me, coded on me, made a huge difference in my career." Or it actually, I've had a couple cases where someone has come back and said that made a difference in my life. And I talk about wisely wielding tech skills to evolve those problem solving towards people. Hats off to you, Byron. That's cool.
Well, I can't say that I'm completely out of coding. Like I can't stay away from it. I love it a little bit too much. So like when I was asking you earlier about ways to kind of get your fix while you're still a leader, I was thinking about some of the things that I do too, which is like instead of building the core application, I'll build a boilerplate.
Yep.
So for a while, I was working with several teams where we would be kind of like constantly starting new projects and then launching a project for a client, like bespoke custom software.
Right.
And so it was useful to have a really well built
kind of a
boilerplate for our team. Yeah, that already had a lot of the things built in that we like to use. Yes. And so I dedicated myself to building those boilerplates for a while. That was fun. Building custom, like not custom, but building community libraries and stuff, NPM packages that then my teams would use. That was fun. Working on open source projects. That was, so these are ways that I was able to get my fix.
I like those. To me, there's a few, in addition to those, because I definitely resonate with those. I would add, I think the low hanging fruit is being code reviewer, right? Because you're not actually getting the development. Maybe you don't get that dopamine hit, but you can immediately, especially for more junior developers, provide some feedback that can help them evolve and become better, while still being at the code. So that's kind of the lowest bar. Like, but that's not really coding. Next is when you're involved with the sprint planning or what have you, making sure you're taking the small problems, not the most complex problems. You're taking the ones that are a little bit more simple, and kind of that servant leader approach of like, let the rest of the team take the complex stuff, because I'm going to be in the meetings half the time, but I can still do a little bit of work here and there. So that's an approach I've taken and has worked pretty well sometimes, I think. And then the other one, kind of like your open source project kind of stuff, sometimes it's just not doable. And so you got to have your side project for the weekend, right? Like I've got 75 ideas in my head. I can code. No one's going to tell me not to code my own dang stuff at home. So I still do that too.
Well, my wife does. She
Well, that's true. Yeah. Nobody at work says that.
Days of my weekend projects are gone.
Yeah. Fair,
I guess the kids will all have to graduate before I can go back to weekend projects.
My daughter's a freshman in college, so I have a little bit more time, but there you go. Nice.
But one thing that I would add is pair programming. Like if you can, you can just like nestle up to a junior developer or just any developer and offer to do some pair programming. As long as they don't feel, what do you call it? Like not offended, but if they're intimidated, as long as they don't feel threatened, intimidated, then it's probably a good thing.
Yeah, that would be another conversation you and I could probably spend another hour on is pair programming, because there's so many teams that are terrified of it. There's a handful of teams that like, I can't live without it. And I think there's a lot of good ways to do it and a lot of bad ways to do it. And if you got, kind of that expectation that it's, hey, this is a learning opportunity. We're going, regardless of your seniority, we're both going to learn from each other. Setting that right environment, it can be so powerful. I mean, yes. I've learned, coding 20 years in C# or whatever, and some person that's been doing it for a year and a half, and I watch them, I'm like, I've never seen that. What are you doing? So I love that. And so, I'm a big proponent of that pair programming, especially if you can turn it away from I'm looking over your shoulder,
Yeah, exactly. Man, I think that whoever's listening to this episode, I hope that they're getting that there's no one way to do this. As a technical leader, you need to recognize that your contribution has value, whether it's in the trenches or in the leadership side. You can still be smart and responsible with your tech skills, and you can still jump in and help people, especially if it's not taking away their autonomy, without taking away the things that drive them and make them want to come to work every day. Don't take away their dopamine hit. You go find your dopamine somewhere else.
Right. How do you increase that dopamine hit? Right. Like that's going to keep them more excited about the next problem. I love that. That's really good.
But getting out of their way is going to help them to flourish. And if they flourish, then you've done something maybe even more noble and worthwhile, which is investing in them and helping them to multiply themselves, which is way more than you could do all by yourself. Right? Would you say that's a good thesis for the show today?
Yeah, I'm in, brother, for sure.
Got an amen. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Karl, if there's one thing you think tech leaders should start doing tomorrow, what would it be?
Great. Well, thank you for giving me a quick heads up on that, because I wanted to have something that was meaningful. And so I broke it into a 3-part answer. So I think there's for those of you guys who are listening to this, you might find in one of 3 categories. One is you're in too deep technically. We've talked a little bit about that. I love what Byron just said of like being conscious of getting out of your team members' way. So my advice to you, if you fall in that category, is identify the big tasks and get out of the way, get them off of your plate, get them to your team, and take on those less complex items. What about the flip side? You've moved into management and you're watching your team make mistakes and you're like, but I'm a manager, so I just got to let it be. Well, then be explicit with your team at your next team meeting, right? Approach with humility. Don't be like, I know everything. But at the same time, like, how do you share that technical knowledge that they aren't benefiting from? And look for those small wins. So maybe it's that code review, or I love the pair programming, right? And then third, I think, Byron, you and I at different points in our careers have certainly fallen into this category of trying to do it all. I can't let go of the code, and I want to be the best manager. I want to flourish everything. And so I'm going to work for 9-10 hours, and then I'm going to code for 3 more hours, and then my wife's going to kill me, and then I'm going to be divorced. And take a breath, right? So my advice is like, you got to delegate. You can't do it all at the same time. And even if you are striving to be both, one foot in one camp, it doesn't mean you have to have them both in, you don't have to be straddling the fence all the time. You can be fully a leader for a while, and then you can, when the timing's right, maybe you dip back in technically, or vice versa. So that would be my 3 points of one advice. Hopefully not too much there.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a great conversation, and obviously we could go on and on and on with so many other things. So we're going to have to do this again, Karl. We're going to have another stab at some other topics. I think pair programming would be a great start.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Obviously, lots of other things we could be talking about as well, because we both are very aligned on wanting to promote team flourishing and helping other tech leaders to do the same. So this has been a great conversation. Karl, how can people connect with you?
Absolutely. Easiest thing is LinkedIn, Karl Archuleta. I'm sure it'll be on some up here or down there somewhere. LinkedIn's probably the quickest way. I'd love to have a conversation, formal or informal. Any questions that come up from this, I'm happy to chat about that. That would be great. And Byron, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate what you're doing here, and I think it's an impactful effort to let's make these teams flourish, because we are humans building stuff for other humans, and even when AI comes into the mix, it's still that same thing, right?
That's right. All right, man, let's go out there and amplify something.